Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Oppenheimer Security Transcripts. So, today I am pre recording this episode, but still feel free to leave your comments and questions in the chat because I will be in the chat looking at those questions and responding to them in chat form. Also, you can always leave a comment and I'll get back to it later. But yeah, today we're just finishing up the third transcript day of the Oppenheimer hearings. We have today is April 14th, 1954, Wednesday, and it's the afternoon session now after a brief recess. Um, but since last week's episode, I did some research on some of the various things that came up in the hearing yesterday, and I just wanted to talk about that for a little bit. So, the first thing is the Independent Citizens Committee of the Arts, Sciences, and Professions. That is the ICCASP. I had no idea what this organization was, so I'm just like, okay, is this just some weird nonsense organization that just like puts a bunch of famous people's names on their like executive board just to get the clout? Um, but it seems like this was a legitimate organization. What it sounds like I mean, I'll just read this first paragraph from Wikipedia. The ICCASP was an American association that lobbied unofficially for New Deal causes as well as the cause of world peace. Members included future U.S. President Ronald Reagan. Some members would later be accused of infiltrating the group to spread socialist and occasionally pro-Soviet communist ideas. The group included a chapter, sometimes called the Hollywood Independent blah blah blah, involved in the Hollywood 10. Um, in the Hollywood 10, that's the Hollywood blacklist. So that is interesting because, there's a lot of big names here of people that were on this committee. Uh, like a lot of famous people that you don't think of as having ties to communism. But uh, I think it sounds like eventually this organization became targeted by the House Un-American Activities Committee. And so that's why this hearing was sort of dredging up Oppenheimer's association with them, even though he continued to insist, no, I'm not associated with them. They just made me their, vice chairman, and I rejected their offer. Um, but that is interesting because, again, like Leonard Bernstein, uh, Duke Ellington, Frank Sinatra, Eleanor Roosevelt, you don't really think of these people as like, you know, Soviet spies or something, right? So it's just kind of interesting um, that Oppenheimer's getting so much flack for being a part of this organization. I wonder if any of these people ever faced similar flack for that association. Um, so that's interesting. Then another thing I was looking into was Giovanni Rossi Lomanitz, who was a student of Oppenheimer's and then an employee, and he was accused of being a communist. And it sounds well, and something interesting that came up is that Oppenheimer said that he had heard basically a rumor about Lomanitz that his family, someone in his family, had been involved in a sedition case in Oklahoma. So I couldn't find the origins of this claim. Uh, it's probably just kind of lost to history and the historical record. There's probably like some Oklahoma newspaper from like 80 years ago or something that says something about this, but I didn't have the time to look that deeply into it. But just based on the name Giovanni Rossi, turns out that Lomanitz is named after a anarchist, like anarchist, not a socialist, but I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, that's interesting. So this is where did it say this? Um, Yeah, so I mean, he was, called into the Huac committee. He had a lot of, issues. And of course, we have in Oppenheimer, he's played by Josh Zuckerman. Um, so, Yeah, but he's named after this Giovanni Rossi, who basically he set up a bunch of communes in Italy in like, you know, the 1800s. So, yeah, definitely kind of interesting. So Lomanitz definitely came from a family of socialists. Ah, here it is. His father was an agricultural chemist and named his son after the Italian socialist Giovanni Rossi, who had founded an agricultural commune in Brazil in the 1890s. So yeah, he definitely came from a family of communists because they're like, oh, let's name our son after this communist figure that we like. So that definitely, is a bit of an indicator of his background there. But um, but yeah, so that was all the research that's relevant for the most recent episode. Um, so yeah, I don't know what to put in the top right corner now because I'm basically done with that. I guess I could just make this larger. Um, oh, wrong one. There we go. I'll just do that for now because I'm pre-recording, so there's no chat to show, unfortunately. But yeah, so let's just get right into it now. Okay. All right. So remember, they were on recess for lunch basically, and now it's 2 p.m. and they're back, and they are doing more talking. So we start with Mr. Gray. Oh yeah, also I will say, just briefly before we begin, that I'm back in the library. I'm in the same room I was in 2 episodes ago or 3 episodes ago. And I think that this room basically has Wi-Fi issues. I think that's the problem. Doesn't matter today because I am in, you know, this, I'm pre-recording this, but just a good thing to note in the future. I'm going to keep track of that. Don't use this room for the live stream because of the Wi-Fi issues. But yeah, so um, okay, I think that's all the preliminaries out of the way. So I'll get started. Okay. We will begin the proceeding now. The records show the presence of Mr. Herbert S. Marks. Ah, okay. Herbert S. Marks. I don't have a thing for him to show his presence, but let's just make one quickly. Herbert Marks. I'll just put him right here. He's just another lawyer here. Where's a good place for him? He can go there, and he is not depicted in the movie, so I will add him. Herbert S. Marks. So if you remember from previous episodes, Gordon Gray had a lot of consternation over the fact that this guy, Herbert Marks, who is one of Oppenheimer's lawyers, is involved in things but just isn't like officially allowed to be involved in them because there's confidentiality stuff, and so he's just pissed off, and I guess it's gotten to the point where Garrison has decided, okay, fine, we'll just bring him in, okay? Like, stop whining. He's here, okay? Like, chill, Gordon. Chill, okay? Um, but yeah. Actually, I will quickly look up if there is a picture I can use for Herbert S. Marks to see if he. Okay, I don't think he I don't think is very prominent, so no picture for him. Just, oh wait, I already had a little, okay. I did not realize I already had a slide prepared for him. So I'll just, yeah, there we go. I'll just fix that. Okay. I was prepared, but I wasn't prepared to know I was prepared. Okay, so let's continue. The record should show the presence of Mr. Herbert S. Marks. Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask Mr. Oh, shoot, sorry. Okay, there we go. Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask Mr. Herbert Marks. Sorry, there's a lot of typos in this. Mr. Chairman, I would like to, as Mr. Herbert S. Marks, associated with me as counsel in this matter, to make a brief statement about how the copy of the teletype message that I read into the record this morning from Dr. Oppenheimer to Colonel Marshall came into first his possession and then mine. All right, sir. Shortly after the general manager's letter to Dr. Oppenheimer notifying him of this matter of the proceedings, shortly after that, but considerably before Mr. Garrison came into this case, I began working in Dr. Oppenheimer's behalf in preparation for it. On one occasion, I think it was the latter part of December, I was in Princeton and asked for whatever material Dr. Oppenheimer had there which might bear on any of the allegations in the letter. As I recall, Dr. Oppenheimer's secretary gave me this particular folder, or this particular batch of letters. The top one, which is a letter to Dr. Oppenheimer from Colonel Lansdale, dated October 22, 1943, this is a copy that I have, was marked confidential, but the word canceled was written over confidential. There also appeared a notation, classification canceled through the Atomic Energy Commission, H. Carroll, for the Chief Declassification Branch. I notice that the date under that cancellation is January 29th, 1953. I think that must be in error because this trip that I have reference to would have been in December of 1953 and not January. The explanation, which as I remember Dr. Oppenheimer's secretary gave me, was this was just at the time when the Commission's representatives were in Princeton transferring or taking away files that Dr. Oppenheimer had there, which were classified. Dr. Oppenheimer's secretary explained further to me that in the course of her releasing these classified files to the Atomic Energy Commission, as she had been instructed to do, she went over them and identified certain items of correspondence which seemed to be of an essentially non-classified character, and made arrangements with the security officer for their declassification. Without checking with her, I can't be sure that this explanation is the one that accounts for all of the papers in this particular batch, of which the one referred to this morning, the teletype, which I believe was the one with the date of July 31st, 1943, of which that item was one. Without checking with Dr. Oppenheimer's secretary, I can't be sure that this is the explanation, but I think it is. Is it your impression that the security officers declassified that whole file as of whatever date in December it was? You see, all I have, Mr. Gray, is the top letter of the batch with confidential marked on it, and then canceled out and noted declassified. These are apparently copies of material which Dr. Oppenheimer's secretary made, and I assume she kept whatever she copied from. The only thing I can conjecture is that declassification must have been intended to apply to the whole batch, but perhaps Mr. Carroll of the Commission would be checking on that, and we will also do so with Dr. Oppenheimer's secretary if you wish. I think I should say for the record that although the original of the teletype message that we have been discussing, I have forgotten the date of it, is in the possession of the board and is itself marked confidential, of course I have no information as to when this was classified confidential. Sorry about that. Okay. I have no information as to when this was classified confidential, whether then sent or some later date. I do not know. We do not know. All teletypes out of Los Alamos carried the security designation whatever their content. I would guess that, but I was not informed on that point. So I assume this was originally a confidential message. Again, I assume this is the original. I would like, Mr. Chairman, to give you the whole file for your inspection and that of the board. Of course, some of this is correspondence between Dr. Oppenheimer and Lomanitz and includes these communications. I don't think there is any point in dwelling on this at the moment, Mr. Garrison. I think Mr. Marks has given us the best explanation he can give, unless some member of the board or council, Mr. Robb, has any questions of Mr. Marks. Perhaps we better proceed with the hearing. I understand, Mr. Gray, that there was a question this morning as to whether I had any other file. I think there was this file and one other that could have been, one or two more, although I doubt it. In any case, when we decided to concentrate the final preparation of the case in Mr. Garrison's office, I simply scribbled on them as on this file, Dr. Oppenheimer's own files, and turned them over to Mr. Garrison. The only other file I remember of that character was the one dealing with the Independent Citizens Committee of the Arts, Sciences, and Professions, but my office will have a record of precisely what they were, and I will check that. In any event, that file, too, had nothing to do with Dr. Oppenheimer's relations with the government at all, or his period of service at Los Alamos. I, Mr. Chairman, certainly have no recollection of any file containing any correspondence of a quasi-governmental character except this one. The ICC file, which Mr. Marks turned over to us, we have read completely into the record in total. There may be one or two other files of that character. Again, I am not quite sure, but I am quite certain on the quasi-governmental character. Yes, it would appear, and this is entirely supposition, that Dr. Oppenheimer had retained a file containing all of his correspondence with and relating to Mr. Lomanitz, and that the security officer apparently took that file and allowed Dr. Oppenheimer Security to make copies for another complete file on this. This would be the impression I get from what Mr. Marks said. That is my impression of what occurred, but I would have to check with Dr. Oppenheimer's secretary. Mr. Garrison also mentioned to me that there was a question as to whether I had taken any files from the Atomic Energy Commission. I don't know whether that question was on the record or off, but for your reassurance, I must say, of course not. I took away from the Commission when I left in 1947 a great many papers that were mine or that were government printing office documents, but all of my files were reviewed page by page by a security office who then stamped the bundles that were transferred to me personally and gave me a certificate to the effect that there was nothing in them that belonged to the Commission or of a classified nature. Thank you very much. I understood Mr. Marks came for the purpose of making this statement. Is that right? I would like to have him remain this afternoon, Mr. Chairman. The record will show that he remains in his capacity of, how do you describe him? Co-counsel? Yes. So the record will reflect. That is the capacity I made this statement, I take it. So the record will... Oh, wait, sorry. There is no reason that the record should not reflect that. May I proceed? Yes, if you will. So, oh yeah. Whereupon, J. Robert Oppenheimer, the witness on the stand at the time of taking the recess, resumed the stand and testified further as follows. Okay, so now it's time to get back to the, it says direct examination, but I think it means to say cross-examination. But yeah, that's just a funny interplay there. Uh, Mr. Gray is just upset about the documents, um, which is just funny because it's like, I mean, I said this last time, but it's like, I guess it's an internal problem, the whole classified documents thing, because that's a issue today as well with former President Trump. So, yeah, it's just interesting to see how this plays out back then, because the interesting thing is that nowadays, um, there's so many documents that are just digital. Um, and so one of the things I found surprising about the whole Trump documents thing is the fact that they're physical documents. Um, I like I don't really keep physical documents, for instance, of my own personal records. I keep mostly just digital things. Um, but obviously back then in 1954 that wasn't an option. So now it's like, okay, does the secretary have the files or do you have the files? How did you get the files? Did you do the proper things to get the files? Blah 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 blah. But yeah, anyway, back to the real meat of the case here. Okay. Dr. Oppenheimer, while we are on the matter of the telegram about Mr. Lomanitz, I notice in the file that Mr. Garrison handed to the chairman a copy of a wire you sent to Mr. Lomanitz dated July 31, 1943. Quote, Mr. Lomanitz, address, have requested in proper places reconsideration of support for your deferment. Cannot guarantee outcome but have made strong request. Suggest you ask Fiddler for current developments. Good luck, Oppie. End quote. Did you send that wire? Evidently. Why was it so important to you that Lomanitz be not drafted? I am not sure that it was so important to me. I had this outraged communication from Condon. You had what? An outraged communication from Condon about it. We were very short of people. I doubt whether there was any more to it than that. Dr. Condon's opinions had a great weight with you? They had some weight with me. I beg your pardon? They had some weight with me. I thought it reflected a sense of trouble in Berkeley. Is it your recollection that the communication was by way of a letter? Yes. Did you put that in your file? I don't have it. I didn't ask you that, sir. Did you put it in your file? I don't know. Did you get any other letters from Rossi Lomanitz which are not in your file? I got some later. When? Toward the end of the war. All of these were open and read, and there may be a record of them. I don't have any in mind. I had no further communications about his situation in the army after I wrote a letter to his commanding officer. What were those communications about that you got from him later? I think about coming back to Berkeley and studying after the war, that kind of thing. Did he ask your assistance in getting him back to Berkeley? I don't recall. I don't see why that would be necessary. What do you mean by that? I would not have had to get him into the university. Did you do anything about getting him a job or getting him placed after he got back from the army? I don't know. I wasn't there at the time. Wherever you were, did you do anything about it? I have no recollection whatever. He would have come back as a graduate student, and I have no recollection at all of how he got back as a graduate student. If he had asked you, I assume there is no reason why you would not have helped him. No. Doctor, do you have a file of correspondence with all of your graduate students who were working on this project with you? No. Is there any particular reason why you preserved the file on Lomanitz? Yes, there is. He was in some kind of trouble. I thought that some day I might be asked about how I behaved. So you wanted to keep a record of it. That's right. I assume you likewise charged your mind with the matter, is that correct? No, I think I forgot it. Beg pardon? I forgot it. You knew it was a matter that had to be handled with some care, did you not, because of the fact that he was in trouble? I was aware of the fact that he was in trouble, and thought I should keep what record I had. Doctor, before the noon recess, we were talking about your acquaintanceship or friendship, whichever it was, with Mr. Eltenton. You told us, I believe, that he came to your home on one occasion for a meeting, is that right? Yes. That was in the evening? I think it was in the afternoon. Who had called that meeting? I am not clear about that. I have tried to remember and I can't. Do you remember who presided? No, maybe I did. I believe I was asking you to try to remember who was there. I identified, probably fumblingly, one or two people. It is possible that Addis was there. Who? Addis. It is quite possible that Hilgard was there. It is probable that Hildebrand was there. I am not certain or very sure beyond that. When you said Addis, you meant Thomas Addis. I did. Was David Adelson there? You asked me that. Yes, I did. I don't think you answered. I can't. I doubt it, but I am not certain. The last one I asked you about was Jerome Vinograd. Was he there? Yes, you did. I answered that not being acquainted with him, I don't know. How many people were there? 15. You're quite positive that Eltenton was there? No, but I think so. Had you met Eltenton on many other occasions? Oh yes, I had met him before that. Where? I don't remember. A social occasion? Yes. Can you recall any of them? No. Do you recall who introduced you to him? No. Did Eltenton come to your house on any other occasion? I am quite sure not. Oh wait, I just want to say that is interesting. Do you recall who introduced you to him? Because I remember the scene in the movie where he gets introduced to Eltenton, and I think one of the characters does introduce him, and I forget who it was, but the movie there is making a history claim that Oppenheimer, you know, claims that he didn't know. So that's interesting. Anyway, okay. Did Eltenton come to your house on any other occasion? I am quite sure not. Did he come to your house in 1942 on one occasion to discuss certain awards which the Soviet government was going to make to certain scientists? If so, it is news to me. I assume you know that this is true, but I certainly have no recollection of it. You have no recollection of it? No. Let me see if I can refresh your recollection, Doctor. Do you recall him coming to your house to discuss awards to be made to certain scientists by the Soviet government, and you suggesting the names of Bush, Morgan, and perhaps one of the Comptons? There is nothing unreasonable in the suggestions, but you don't recall. But I really don't remember. What did you know about Eltenton's background in 1943 when this Eltenton-Chevalier episode occurred? Two things, three things, four things. That he was an Englishman, that he was a chemical engineer, that he had spent some time in the Soviet Union, that he was a member of the Federation of Architects, Engineers, Chemists, and Technicians, five things, that he was employed, I think, at Shell Development Company. How did you know all those things? Well, about the Shell Development Company and the Federation of Architects, Engineers, Chemists, and Technicians, I suppose he told me, or someone else employed there told me. As for the background in Russia, I don't remember. Maybe he told me, maybe a friend told me. That he was an Englishman was obvious. Why? His accent. You were fairly well acquainted with him, were you not? No, I think we probably saw each other no more than 4 or 5 times. Did you see Eltenton after this episode occurred? No. Have you ever seen him since? No. Could that have been on purpose on your part? Have you avoided him? I have not had to, but I think I would have. You have mentioned your conversation with Colonel Lansdale, which I believe you said took place at Los Alamos. Yes. In which he told you he was worried about the security situation at Berkeley. I believe we agreed that worry would naturally include a fear of espionage. That's right. Did he mention any names in connection with that worry? Lomanitz was obviously in the picture, and I believe that is the only one. Weinberg? I don't think he did. But Lomanitz, obviously. Lomanitz. When did you first mention your conversation with Chevalier to any security officer? I didn't do it that way. I first mentioned Eltenton. Yes. On a visit to Berkeley almost immediately after Lansdale's visit to Los Alamos. Was that to Lieutenant Johnson, do you remember? I don't remember, but it was to a security officer there. At Berkeley. That's right. If the record shows that it was to Lieutenant John Johnson on August 25th, 1943, you would accept that? I would accept that. You mentioned the Eltenton incident in connection with Lomanitz, didn't you? The context was this. I think Johnson told me that the source of the trouble was the unionization of the radiation laboratory by the Federation of Architects, Engineers, Chemists, and Technicians. Possibly I had heard that from Lansdale. The connection that I made was between Eltenton and this organization. In your answer at page 22, you say, referring to the Eltenton episode, "It has long been clear to me that I should have reported the incident at once." It is. The events that led me to report it, which I doubt ever would have become known without my report, were unconnected with it. You have told us that your discussion with Colonel Lansdale encompassed the subject of espionage. Of course, you have told us also that the Eltenton matter involved espionage. Is that correct? Let us be careful. The word espionage was not mentioned. No. The word indiscretion was mentioned. That is all that Lansdale said. Indiscretion was talking to unauthorized people who in turn would talk to other people. This is all I was told. I got worried when I learned that this union was connected with other troubles. But doctor, you told us this morning, did you not, that you knew that Lansdale was worried about espionage at Berkeley. Is that correct? I knew he was worried about the leakage of information. Isn't that a polite name for espionage? Not necessarily. I will ask you now, didn't you know that Lansdale was concerned about the possibility of espionage at Berkeley? About the possibility, yes. Uh, yes, that's right. So, doctor, it is not quite correct to say that the Eltenton incident was not connected with your talk with Lansdale, is it? I didn't mean it in that sense. I meant that it had nothing to do with Chevalier or Eltenton with respect to the events that aroused this. But your talk with Lansdale did have to do with the subject which included Chevalier and Eltenton, didn't it? I have described it as well as I can. Chevalier's name was not mentioned, Eltenton's name was not mentioned, and espionage was not mentioned. I didn't say that, but it had to do with the subject which involved Chevalier or at least Eltenton. Sure, that is why I brought it up. What did you tell Lieutenant Johnson about this when you first mentioned Eltenton to him? I had 2 interviews, and therefore I am not clear as to which was which. May I help you? Please. I think your first interview with Johnson was quite brief, was it not? That's right. I think I said little more than that Eltenton was somebody to worry about. Yes. Then I was asked why did I say this. Then I invented a cock and bull story. Then you were interviewed the next day by Colonel Pash, were you not? That's right. Who was he? He was another security officer. That was quite a lengthy interview, was it not? I didn't think it was that long. For your information, that was August 26, 1943. Right. Then there came a time when you were interviewed by Colonel Lansdale. I remember that very well. That was in Washington, wasn't it? That's right. That was September 12, 1943. Right. Would you accept that? Surely. Then you were interviewed again by the FBI in 1946, is that right? In between, I think, came Groves. Pardon? In between came Groves. Yes, but you were interviewed in 1946, is that right? That's right. Now let us go back to your interview with Colonel Pash. Did you tell Pash the truth about this thing? No. You lied to him? Yes. What did you tell Pash that was not true? That Eltenton had attempted to approach members of the project, 3 members of the project, through intermediaries. What else did you tell him that wasn't true? That is all I really remember. That's all. Did you tell Pash that Eltenton had attempted to approach 3 members of the project through intermediaries, through an intermediary? So that we may be clear, did you discuss with or disclose to Pash the identity of Chevalier? No. Let us refer, then, for the time being, to Chevalier as X. All right. Did you tell Pash that X had approached 3 persons on the project? I am not clear whether I said there were 3 X's or that X approached 3 people. Didn't you say that X had approached 3 people? Probably. Why did you do that, Doctor? Because I was an idiot? Is that your only explanation, Doctor? I was reluctant to mention Chevalier. Yes. No doubt somewhat reluctant to mention myself. Yes. But why would you tell him that Chevalier had gone to 3 people? I have no explanation for that except the one already offered. Didn't that make it all the worse for Chevalier? I didn't mention Chevalier. No, but X. It would have. Certainly. In other words, if X had gone to 3 people, that would have shown, would it not, that he was deeply involved. That he was deeply involved. That was not just a casual conversation. Right. And you know that, didn't you? Yes. Yes. Sorry. And you knew that, didn't you? Yes. Did you tell Colonel Pash that X had spoken to you about the use of microfilm? It seems unlikely. You have a record, and I will abide by it. Did you? I don't remember. If X had spoken to you about the use of microfilm, that would have shown definitely that he was not an innocent contact. It certainly would. Did you tell Colonel Pash that X had told you that the information would be transmitted through someone at the Russian consulate? Did you? I would have said not, but I clearly see that I must have. If X had said that, that would have shown conclusively that it was a criminal conspiracy, would it not? That's right. Did Pash ask you for the name of X? I imagine he did. Don't you know he did? Sure. Did he tell you why he wanted it? In order to stop the business. He told you that it was a very serious matter, didn't he? I don't recollect that, but he certainly would have. You knew that he wanted to investigate it, did you not? That's right. And didn't you know that your refusal to give him the name of X was impeding the investigation? In actual fact, I think the only person that needed watching or should have been watched was Eltenton, but as I concocted the story, that did not emerge. That was your judgment? Yes. But you knew that Pash wanted to investigate this? Yes. And didn't you know, Doctor, that by refusing to give the name of X, you were impeding the investigation? I must have known that. Well, know now, don't you? Well, actually, you must have known it then. Actually, the only important thing to investigate was Eltenton. What did Pash want to investigate? I suppose the 3 people on the project. You knew, didn't you, Doctor, that Colonel Pash and his organization would move heaven and earth to find those 3 people, didn't you? It makes sense. And you know that they would move heaven and earth to find the identity of X, didn't you? Yes. And yet you wouldn't tell them. That's true. So you knew you were impeding them, didn't you? That's right. How long had you known this man, Chevalier, in 1943? For many years. How many? Perhaps 5 or 6 probably. How had you known of him? As a quite close friend. Had you known him professionally or socially? He was a member of the faculty, and I knew him socially. What was his specialty? He was a professor of French. How did you meet him? Do you remember? Possibly at one of the first meetings of the teachers' union, but I'm not certain. And your wives were also friendly? Oh, wait, sorry. Were you a frequent visitor at his house? Yes. And your wives were also friendly? Right. Had you seen him at the meeting of left-wing organizations? Yes, I think the first time I saw him, I didn't know him. He presided at a meeting for Spanish relief, at which the French writer Malraux was the speaker. Where was this meeting held? In San Francisco. At whose house? It was a public meeting. What other meetings did you see him at? I'm not sure that I can catalog them all. Parties for Spanish relief. This meeting was held at his house, at which Schneiderman talked. The teachers' union meetings, if they are counted as left-wing. What was the teachers' union meeting about? They had them regularly. Were those teachers' unions meetings held at private homes? No. Some of them? I don't think the union could have met in private homes. I don't know. No, these were held in halls, or I think in the International House. Any other meetings that you remember? I would be certain that there were, but they are not coming up. This meeting that you mentioned, at which Schneiderman spoke, that was December 1, 1940, was it not? I don't know the date, but I will accept it. Who was Schneiderman? He was the secretary of the party in California. The Communist Party? Right. This was held at Chevalier's house. Yes. How many people were present? 20, as a guess. In the evening? Yes. Do you recall who was there? Not very accurately, and not with certainty. I didn't even recall the meeting until my wife refreshed my memory. Was Isaac Fokoff there? It's possible. Was Dr. Addis there? I think so. Was Rudy Lambert there? I don't remember that, but possibly. Do you remember anybody else who was there? Mr. Jack Strauss. Who? How do you spell that? Straus. I don't know whether it is one or two S's. Who was he? A San Francisco businessman. Was he a member of the Communist Party? Not to my knowledge. By the way, was Lambert a member of the Communist Party? Yes. That was his function? I never knew. You never knew he was a member? I knew he was a member, and in fact had an official job. How often did you see Lambert? Half a dozen times. In what connection? Different ones. Affairs like this. I had lunch with him once or twice with Fokoff. I saw him at a Spanish party. What was the purpose of those luncheons? This was one of the times when they were telling me about why I needed to give them money. Money to what? To them for use in Spain. Fokoff was a communist? Yes. What was his job in the party? I think he was treasurer of something, but I never knew of what. Can you describe Lambert to us? A lean, rather handsome man, moderate height, rather an effective speaker in conversation. What was the purpose, again, of the meeting at which Schneiderman spoke? I suppose it was to acquaint the interested gentry with the present line or then line of the Communist Party. Who asked you to go? The Chevaliers. It was his house, wasn't it? Yes. Did you know Chevalier as a fellow traveler? I so told the FBI in 1946, and I did know him as a fellow traveler. He followed the party line pretty closely, didn't he? Yes, I imagine he did. Did you have any reason to suspect he was a member of the Communist Party? At the time I knew him? Yes, sir. No. Do you know? No. You knew he was quite a red, didn't you? Yes, I would say quite pink. Not red? I won't quibble. You say in your answer that you still considered him a friend. I do. When did you last see him? On my last trip to Europe. He is living in Paris, divorced, and has been remarried. We had dinner with them one evening. The origin of this, or at least part of the origin, may I interpose? That was in December 1953? Yes, December. Go ahead. He wrote me a note saying that he had been at UNESCO and had run into Professor Bohr, who told him I was coming to Europe. We were coming to Europe. Professor who? Bohr. He asked us to look him up if we got to Paris. We planned to do so. My wife called. He was out of town on a job. He got back and we had dinner together, the four of us. The next day he picked us up and drove us out to visit with Mulroe, who has had rather major political changes since 1936. We had a conversation of about an hour and he drove us back to the hotel. How long was Bohr in this country? Bohr? Yes. He has been here many different times. Just about the time that you began the work. He arrived early in 1944 and left about mid-1945, so that would be a year and a half. Did he go under the name Bohr here? He had the code name of Nicholas Baker. What kind of a code was that? It was meant to conceal from people who should know that he was in this country and working on the atomic project. I see. Getting back to your visit with Chevalier in December 1953, was Dr. Mulrow the gentleman who first introduced you to Chevalier? He did not introduce me. He was the speaker at a meeting at which Chevalier presided. Mulrow became a violent supporter of de Gaulle and his great brain man and deserted politics and went into purely philosophic and literary work. Our talks was purely of that. What was your conversation with Chevalier that you said you had for about an hour? With Malraux, that was. It was not with Chevalier? Chevalier took us there. He had dinner with him and his new wife the night before. The talk was personal, diffuse, and about how they were living and how we were living. Did you talk about Chevalier's passport? No. Did you thereafter go to the American embassy to assist Dr. Chevalier in getting a passport to come back to the country? No. Do you know a Dr. Jeffrey Wyman? Yes, I do. Who is he? He is the science attaché of the State Department in Paris. He is a man I knew at Harvard when I was a student there, and Cambridge. He resigned from Harvard to accept this job. The first day or so my wife and I were in Paris, we called at the embassy and we called on the charge d'affaires. We called at the embassy and we called on the... Oh, wait, sorry. I read that thing twice. We called on the charge d'affaires. The ambassador was ill and away, and Wyman asked us to lunch, and we had lunch with him. This was a propriety. We didn't see Wyman again. Did you discuss with Wyman or anybody else the matter of Chevalier's passport? I did not. At any time? At no time. Let us move along to your interview with Colonel Lansdale on September 12th. Right. Did you tell him substantially the same story you told Colonel Pash? I don't know whether he repeated it to me or I repeated it to him. In all events, if he repeated it to you, I did modify it. You affirmed it as the truth. Yes. So you lied to him too. That's right. Did he plead with you to give him the name of X? He did. Did he explain why he wanted the name? I suppose he did. I don't remember. You knew why he did. It didn't need explanation. Did he explain to you that either X or Eltenton might have continued to make other contacts? This would have been a reasonable thing to say. Did you give him the name of X? No. Suppose we break now for a few minutes, whereupon a short recess was taken. We may resume. Actually, I'm just going to take a drink of water for a sec. So yes, of course, just more grilling from Dr. Robb or Mr. Robb about various things. Some of these conversations are scenes in the movie, some of them aren't. But yeah, it's definitely interesting that it's interesting how Robb is just going after him and like trying to get him to contradict himself. Um, and Oppenheimer might be sounding kind of like unhelpful and obstinate here in all of his I don't know or like that's what you say, blah blah blah. But like if you think about it, like how well do you really remember things that you did 10 years ago, like every single conversation you had with a bunch of different people that you didn't even know that well. So it kind of makes sense that he optically sounds like he's being like not very forthcoming here, but I don't think that would be fair to say just because of how hard it would be to remember all of this. But anyway, we may resume. Doctor, just so the record will be complete, Do you recall in 1950 getting a letter from Dr. Chevalier, who was then in San Francisco, asking you to assist him by telling him what you testified before the House Committee about the Chevalier-Eltenton incident? Yes, I remember. Do you recall answering that letter? I did answer it. I think I did not tell him what I testified because it was an executive session, but referred him to a press account of what I testified. I'm not quite certain on this point. At that time, he was attempting to get a passport to leave the United States, was he? I thought that was later, but I'm not sure. That may have been. You did hear about it when he was attempting to get a passport, did you? Yes. We will come to that later. I will read you and ask you if this is the letter that you wrote to him. I'm sorry I haven't a copy of it. On the stationery of the Institute for Advanced Study, Princeton, New Jersey, Office of the Director, 24 February 1955. Oh, wait, sorry. I forgot to flip back. That has all been Robb. I'll start over. We will come to that later. I will read you and ask you if this is the letter that you wrote to him. I'm sorry I haven't a copy of it. On the stationery of the Institute for Advanced Study, Princeton, New Jersey, Office of the Director, 24 February 1950. Dear Hacken, thank you for your good letter of February 21st. I can understand that an account of my testimony before the House Committee would be helpful to you in seeking a suitable academic position at this time. I cannot send it to you because I have never myself had a transcript, and because the committee ruled at that time that they desired to keep and would keep the hearing secret. But I can tell you what I said. I told them that I would like, as far as possible, to clear the record with regard to your alleged involvement in the atom business. I said that as far as I knew, you knew nothing of the atom bomb until it was announced after Hiroshima, and that most certainly you had never mentioned it or anything that could be connected with it to me. I said that you had never asked me to transmit any kind of information, nor suggested that I could do so, or that I considered doing so. I said that you had told me of a discussion of providing technical information to the USSR which disturbed you considerably, and which you thought I ought to know about. There were surely many other points, but these were, I think, the highlights, and if this account can be of use to you, I hope that you will feel free to use it. As you know, I have been deeply disturbed by the threat to your career which these ugly stories could constitute. If I can help you in that, you may call on me. Sincerely yours, Robert Oppenheimer. Oh, sure, I didn't recollect it. Was the account of your testimony which you gave there an accurate one? I think it is fairly accurate. Dr. Chevalier thereafter used that letter in connection with his passport application. I didn't know that. Did you talk to him about his passport application? I did. He came to Princeton at the time, and I referred him to the council to help him with it. To whom did you refer him? Joe Finelli. In Washington? Right. Is that the same Joe Finelli who represented Mr. Weinberg in his criminal trial? I believe it is. Was he a friend of yours, Finelli? No, I had not met him at the time I referred Chevalier to him, but he represented my brother at the time of his appearance before the House Un-American Committee. Wait just a minute. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I don't think counsel should coach the witness. You are quite right. Then, Mr. Marks. I'm very sorry. Will you resume? I did hear the correction. I hope it won't happen in the future. I think we should be careful, counsel, if you do not mind. I should repeat, I think at this time, because Mr. Marks has not been present before, that we consider under the regulations, spirit, and letter that this is not a trial but an inquiry. Very considerable latitude, as you have observed, and we have all experienced, is certainly allowed, and is to continue in not trying to conform to rigid court procedures. But as far as the testimony of a witness is concerned, it must be his own testimony. I am sorry. I did hear it. I was mistaken. The purpose of the inquiry is not entrapment. I understand that. I met Finelli at one time, but I believe it was after I referred Chevalier to him. I met him first on the train from Washington, to Princeton, where I was introduced by a friend, and I met him later in the preparation for the Weinberg case. But he had been recommended to me very highly, and I suggested him to Chevalier. Did Chevalier come to Princeton to see you about the matter? He came and stayed a couple of days. I don't think it would be right to say he came to see me about the passport problem. He had just been divorced. He talked of nothing but his divorce, but he was worried about whether to use an American passport or his French passport. About when was that, Doctor? Could it have been the spring of 1951? I don't know. It was immediately at the time he left the country. You had previously met Mr. Finelli. I believe I did not meet him until after this. Who, Doctor, had so highly recommended Finelli to you? I had heard him warmly spoken of by Mr. Marks. I think that is what it was. Who was the friend that was on the train with you? Two. Sumner Pike and Archie Alexander. I believe you said that your account of your testimony, which you gave to Dr. Chevalier in your letter of February 24, 1950, was substantially accurate to the best of your recollection. It was intended not to be misleading and to be reassuring. And had your testimony to which this letter referred been true? Was it the truth? My testimony was certainly true. Doctor, I would like to go back with you, if I may, to your interview with Colonel Pash on August 26, 1943. I will read to you certain extracts from the transcript of that interview. Okay. Colonel Pash said to you, quote, Mr. Johnson told me about the little incident or conversation taking place yesterday in which I am very much interested, and had me worried all day yesterday since he called me. Oppenheimer. I was rather uncertain as to whether I should or should not talk to him, Rossi, when I was here. I was unwilling to do it without authorization. What I wanted to tell this fellow was that he had been indiscreet. I know that is right, that he had revealed information. I know that saying that much might in some cases embarrass him. It doesn't seem to have been capable of embarrassing him, to put it bluntly. Do you recall saying that? Let me say I recognize it. In substance, did you say that? I'm sure I did. So there was no question, Doctor, that this matter of the Eltenton incident came up in connection with your conversation about Lomanitz. That's right. There is no question, is there, either, that at that time, August 26, 1943, you knew that Lomanitz had revealed certain confidential information. That I was told by Lansdale, that he had been indiscreet about information. It was not made clear to me. This says, I know that is right, that he had revealed information. So wouldn't you agree that you knew he had revealed information? Yes. Very well. Pash said, quote, well, that is not the particular interest I have. It is something a little more, in my opinion, that is more serious. Mr. Johnson said there was a possibility that there may be some other groups interested. Oppenheimer. I think that is true, but I have no first-hand knowledge that it would be for that reason useful. But I think it is true that a man whose name I never heard, who was attached to the Soviet consul, has indicated indirectly through intermediate people concerned with this project that he was in a position to transmit without any danger of a leak or scandal or anything of that kind information which they might supply. Do you recall saying that in substance? I certainly don't recall it. Would you deny you said it? No. Is there any doubt now that you did mention to Pash a man attached to the Soviet consul? I had completely forgotten it. I can only rely on the transcript. Doctor, for your information, I might say we have a record of your voice. Sure. Do you have any doubt you said that? No. Was that true? Had there been a mention of a man connected with the Soviet consul? I'm fairly certain not. You were very certain before lunch that there had not, weren't you? Yes. You continue in that same manner. Quote, since I know it to be a fact, I have been particularly concerned about any indiscretions which took place in circles close enough to be in contact with him. To put it quite frankly, I would feel friendly to the idea of the commander-in-chief of informing the Russians who are working on this problem. At least I can see there might be some arguments for doing that, but I don't like the idea of having it moved out of the back door. I think it might not hurt to be on the lookout for it. Do you recall saying something like that? I'm afraid I'm not recalling very well, but this is very much the way I would have talked. Did you feel friendly to the idea of the commander-in-chief informing the Russians who were working on the problem? I felt very friendly to the attempt to get real cooperation with the Russians, a two-way cooperation on an official government level. I knew of some of the obstacles to it. Is this an accurate statement of your sentiments as of August 26, 1943? Quote, I would feel friendly to the idea of the commander-in-chief informing the Russians who are working on this problem. The Russians who are working on this problem? Yes, sir. I think that is not an accurate sentence. That is not the way you felt then? No, I think I can say that I felt that I hoped that during the war good collaboration all along the line could be established with the Russians through governmental channels, but I had no idea that there were any Russians working on the problem. What problem? Oh wait, sorry, on the problem, not the project, on the problem. What problem? I would feel quite friendly to the idea of the commander-in-chief informing the Russians who are working on this problem. If you said that to Colonel Pash, did that express your statements? What does it mean to you? I'm asking you. I don't know. That language is not intelligible to you. On this problem? No. The problem of the atom bomb. Did you, in 1943, feel friendly to the idea of the commander-in-chief of informing the Russians who were working on the problem of the atomic bomb? I don't think there were any Russians working on the problem of the atomic bomb. Did you feel friendly to the idea in 1943 of the commander-in-chief giving the Russians any information about the work that was being done on the atomic bomb under your supervision? If it had been a completely reciprocal and open affair with their military technology and ours, I would have seen arguments for it, yes, sir. In other words, you did feel friendly, with these qualifications. You said here, at least I can see there might be some arguments for doing that, but I don't like the idea of having it moved out the back door. Right. Pash then said, quote, could you give me a little more specific information as to exactly what information you have? You can readily realize that phase would be to me as interesting pretty near as the whole project is too. Oppenheimer. Well, I might say the approaches were made through other people who were troubled by them and sometimes came and discussed them with me, and that the approaches were quite indirect. So I feel that to give more perhaps than one name would be to implicate people whose attitudes were one of bewilderment rather than one of cooperation. Do you recall saying something like that? I don't recall that conversation very well. But you did, you are sure, tell Colonel Pash there was more than one person involved. Right. Continuing. Quote, I know of no case, and I am fairly sure in all cases, there where I have heard of these contacts would not have yielded a single thing. That is as far as I can go on that. There is a man whose name was mentioned to me a couple of times. I don't know of my own knowledge that he was involved as an intermediary. It seems, however, not impossible. If you wanted to watch him, it might be the appropriate thing to do. He spent a number of years in the Soviet Union. I think he is a chemical engineer. He may not be here at the time I was with him here employed by the shell development. His name is Eltenton. I would think there was a small chance, well, let me put it this way. He has probably been asked to do what he can to provide information. Whether he is successful or not, I do not know. But he talked to a friend of his who is also an acquaintance of one of the men on the project, and that was one of the channels by which this thing went. Now, I think that to go beyond that would be to put a lot of names down of people who are not only innocent, but whose attitude was 100% cooperative. Do you recall saying that to Colonel Pash? That sounds right. How much of that was not true, approaching more than one person? More than one person was not true. He talked to a friend of his who is also an acquaintance of one of the men on the project. Who was the friend of his that you had in mind? I can only guess, but that would be Chevalier, and I would be the man on the project. Pash said to you, quote, however, anything we may get which would eliminate a lot of research work on our part, would necessarily bring to a closer conclusion anything that we are doing. End quote. In other words, he told you, didn't he, that they were going to have to do a lot of work to investigate this. You answered, quote, well, I am giving you the one name that is or isn't. I mean, I don't know the name of the man attached to the consulate. I think I may have been told, and I may not have been told. I have at least not purposely, but actually forgotten. He is, and he may not be here now. These incidents occurred in the order of about 5, 6, or 7 months ago. End quote. You did tell Colonel Pash that there was a man from the consulate involved, didn't you? I did. Was that true? That there was a man in the consulate involved? Yes. That I read since the end of the war? No. Did you know then that there was? I'm fairly sure not. Chevalier had not said anything to you about a man from the consulate, had he? I have told you my sharp recollection of it. Further along you said, quote, I would feel that the people that they tried to get information from were more or less an accident, and I would be making some harm by saying that, end quote. So you were talking about more than one person, weren't you? Yes, at that time. When you said, quote, well, I will tell you one thing. I have known of 2 or 3 cases, and I think 2 of the men are with me at Los Alamos. They are men who are closely associated with me. Pash, have they told you that either they thought they were contacted for that purpose or they were actually contacted for that purpose? Oppenheimer, they told me they were contacted for that purpose. Pash, for that purpose? End quote. Do you recall saying that to Pash in substance? Yes. So you told him specifically and circumstantially that there were several people that were contacted. Right. And your testimony now is that it was a lie. Right. Then you continue, quote, that is, let me give you the background. The background was, well, you know how difficult it is with relations between these two allies, and there are a lot of people that don't feel very friendly towards Russia. So the information, a lot of our secret information, our radar and so on, doesn't get to them. And they are battling for their lives, and they would like to have an idea of what is going on, and this is just to make up, in other words, for the defects of our official communication. That is the form in which it was presented. End quote. Did you tell Colonel Pash that? I evidently did. This is news to me. Had the matter been presented to you in that form? No. Had anyone told you that it had been presented in that form? No. In other words, this also was a lie. Yes, sir. Then you continue, quote, Then you continue, quote, of course, the actual fact is that since it is not a communication that ought to be taking place, it is treasonable, end quote. Did you say that? Sure. I mean, I am not remembering this conversation, but I am accepting it. You did think it was treasonable anyway, didn't you? Sure. Quote, but it was not presented in that method. It is a method of carrying out a policy which was more or less a policy of the government. The form in which it came was that couldn't an interview be arranged with this man Eltenton, who had very good contact with a man from the embassy attached to the consulate, who is a very reliable guy and who had a lot of experience in microfilm or whatever. End quote. Did you tell Colonel Pash that microfilm had been mentioned to you? Evidently. Was that true? No. Then Pash said to you, quote, well now, I may be getting back to a little systematic picture. These people whom you mention, 2 are down with you now. Were they contacted by Eltenton direct? End quote. You answered, quote, no. Pash, through another party? Oppenheimer, yes. End quote. In other words, you told Pash that X had made these other contacts, didn't you? It seems so. That wasn't true? That's right. This whole thing was a pure fabrication, except for the one name Eltenton. Pash said to you, quote, this would not involve the people, but it would indicate to us Eltenton's channel. We would have to know that this is definite on Eltenton. End quote. In other words, Pash wanted to find out the channel, didn't he? Yes. Pash said again, quote, the fact is this second contact, the contact that Eltenton had to make with these other people, is that person also a member of the project, end quote. You said no. That was correct, wasn't it? Yes. Again you said to Pash, quote, "As I say, if the guy that was here may by now be in some other town, and then all I would have in mind is this. I understand this man to whom I feel a sense of responsibility, Lomanitz, and I feel it for two reasons. One, he is doing work which he started and which he ought to continue. And second, since I more or less made a stir about it when the question of his induction came up. This man may have been indiscreet in circles which would lead to trouble." End quote. Did you say that to Pash? Yes. Did you feel some responsibility for Rossi Lomanitz? Evidently. Why? Well, partly because I had protested his induction, partly because he was a student of mine, partly because I tried to persuade him to go into the secret work. And you continue, quote, "That is the only thing I have to say, because I don't have any doubt that people often approached him with whom he has contact, I mean whom he sees, might feel it their duty if they got word of something to let it go further, and that is the reason I feel quite strongly that association with the communist movement is not compatible with a job on a secret war project. It is just that the two loyalties cannot go. Doctor, who were the people that you thought Lomanitz had contacted, or whom he saw, who might feel it their duty to let the word go further?" I had no idea. You had none then? I don't believe so. I certainly have none now. Did you say that you thought association with the communist movement was incompatible with work on a secret war project? Right. Pash said to you again, quote, "Were these two people you mentioned contacted at the same time?" You answered, "No, they were contacted within a week of each other." Pash, "They were contacted at two different times." Oppenheimer, "Yes, but not in each other's presence." Was that part of what you call a cock and bull story too? It certainly was. Pash said, "And then from what you first hear there was somebody else who probably still remains here who was contacted as well." Oppenheimer, "I think that is true. Do you recall saying something like that?" No, but it fits. Quote, Pash, what I am driving at is that there was a plan at least for some length of time to make these contacts, and you may not have known all the contacts." Oppenheimer, "That is certainly true. That is why I mentioned it. If I knew all about it, then I would say forget it. I thought it would be appropriate to call to your attention the fact that these channels at one time existed." End quote. Doctor, is it now your testimony that there was no plan that you knew of? This whole thing, except for the single reference to Eltenton, I believe to be pure fabrication. In other words, your testimony now is that there was no plan that you knew about. Right. I am certain of that. Excepting the Chevalier incident. Yes, yes. The only thing I mentioned here that has any truth to it is Eltenton. Mr. Chairman, could I just make a short request at this point? Yes. I appreciate the existence of the rule under which we cannot ask for access to the file, and I am not going to protest that rule. I wonder, however, if it would not be within the proprieties of this kind of proceeding, when counsel reads from a transcript, for us to be furnished with a copy of the transcript as he reads from it. This, of course, is orthodox in a court of law. I don't pretend that this is a court of law, but I do make the request because I don't know what else is in the transcript, and if parts of it are read from, it would seem to me that it would be proper for us to see what parts are not read from, and to look at it as a whole. I don't want to make an argument. I put the question to you. This is getting spicy, of course. This is pretty fun because in the movie they sort of secretly just like bring up this transcript, and that's how it was kind of brought up here. They never really mentioned anything about a transcript. Uh, Robb just starts quoting from it, and the defense is kind of blindsided. But anyway, Mr. Chairman, I don't know of any rule in the court of law that you must furnish counsel with the copy of the transcript you are reading of at that time. I might say that my thought would be at the conclusion of this examination to make the entire transcript a part of the record, and let Mr. Garrison read and see it. And then, if he wants to ask anything about it on redirect, he can do so. I think that would be appropriate. I would like to indicate a caution. I don't know about this particular transcript, but I am not sure that in any case you could be able to make the whole thing a part of the record. I don't know, sir. This is presently marked secret, so I could not make it available to Mr. Garrison at this time. But it is being read into the record. That's right. Let us clarify that point for a moment. There is a classification officer who may at some time be present with us. I don't think he has been in the room, but he will be presented if he does come in and sit in the hearing. Who who is reading the transcript from the point of view of the classification necessities, so that all of the testimony is being read by him with the view to its treatment as open or classified matter, so that all of the testimony will be considered. I don't think that announcement has been made, and I think Dr. Oppenheimer and his counsel are entitled to know that. Then do I understand the response to be that, subject to check with the classification officer, you propose to put the whole transcript in the record? I said that was my disposition, yes, sir, but, Mr. Garrison, as you know, I am not an expert on the matters of classification myself. That is my disposition. This is something that Dr. Oppenheimer participated in, which I presume he knows about. I see no reason why it should not be made available to counsel, but, as you know, as an amateur in the matter of classification, I will have to talk to other people about it. The record will reflect Mr. Garrison's request. I think the record should also reflect that the chairman has nothing to add beyond the exchange of conversation that has taken place here, because I don't know the answer, frankly, Mr. Garrison. We will consider the request and meet it the best we can. I would like to make one further request in the interest of expedition, Mr. Chairman, and that is, if Mr. Robb could conveniently do so, it would be helpful if he checked with the classification officer the text of any further transcripts that he proposes to use, so that, assuming they do not contain government secrets that can't be revealed in the interest of justice in this proceeding, we might have copies of them as soon as you have finished, or I would prefer while you are reading from them, because there has been, and I assume will continue to be, some time lag in the furnishing of transcripts to us. We have not yet had even the first day's transcript, which it is hard for me to believe could have contained anything of a classified nature, and could have been read over rather shortly. I am not being querulous, Mr. Chairman, or complaining, but I just want to point it out. I understand. May I proceed, sir? Yes. Doctor, one further item from the Pash interview. You said to Colonel Pash, according to this transcript, quote, Doctor, one further item from the Pash interview. You said to Colonel Pash, according to this transcript, or Colonel Pash said to you, I can see that we are going to have to spend a lot of time and effort which we ordinarily would not in trying to, well, oh wait, no, this is in quotes, yes, Oppenheimer in quotes. Well, Pash, in trying to run him down before we even go on this. Oppenheimer, you better check up on the consulate, because that is the only one that Eltenton contacted, and without that contact, he would be inefficient, and that would be my... Pash, you say this man is not employed in the consulate. Oppenheimer, Eltenton? Pash, no, this man. Oppenheimer, I have never been introduced to him. Pash, have you ever heard his name mentioned? Oppenheimer, I have never heard his name mentioned, but I have been given to understand that he is attached to the consulate. But isn't it common practice for a consulate or legation to have someone attached to them? Pash, yes, military attachés are really run efficiently. Dr. Oppenheimer, assuming that, Dr. Oppenheimer, assuming that, don't you think you told a story in great detail that was fabricated? I certainly did. Why did you go into such great circumstantial detail about this thing if you were telling a cock and bull story? I fear that this whole thing is a piece of idiocy. I am afraid I can't explain why there was a console, why there was microfilm, why there were 3 people on the project, why 2 of them were at Los Alamos. All of them seems wholly false to me. You will agree, would you not, sir, that if the story you told to Colonel Patch was true, it made things look very bad for Mr. Chevalier. For anyone involved in it, yes, sir. Including you. Right. Isn't it a fair statement today, Dr. Oppenheimer, that according to your testimony now, you told not one lie to Colonel Patch, but a whole fabrication and tissue of lies? Right. In great circumstantial detail, is that correct? Right. Doctor, I would like to refer you again to your answer on page 21, in which you referred to David Bohm and said that you were much surprised that you heard there was much objection to his transfer on security grounds. I believe we had some talk about that this morning. We did. I want to read to you from a memorandum written by then Major De Silva on 22 March 1944, in which he started off, this is file A, 21 March 1944, quote, Dr. Oppenheimer asked through his office for the purpose of relating certain incidents which took place at Berkeley, California, during Dr. Oppenheimer's recent visit there. It goes on to various matters and family, and finally it comes to this. 4. Dr. Oppenheimer went on to say that just as he was preparing to leave his hotel at Berkeley on his return trip, David Joseph Bohm came to see him. Bohm inquired about the possibilities of his being transferred to Project Y on permanent basis, stating that he had a strange feeling of insecurity in his present surroundings. Oppenheimer stated he did not commit himself to Bohm, but told him that he would let Bohm know if any opportunity were to open at this project, and that if Bohm did not hear from Oppenheimer, he should assume that such arrangement was not workable and to forget the matter. Oppenheimer asked the undersigned if he would have objections to Bohm coming to Project Y. The undersigned answered yes. Oppenheimer agreed and said the matter was therefore closed. End quote. Does that memorandum refresh your recollection about your conversation with De Silva? There were two incidents. One was in March 1943 that I described this morning. Yes. This is in March 1944, a year later, I take it. Yes. I gather this is no more than my having been asked by Bohm could he come my checking to see whether the objections to him still obtained. I see. I think that is all. Was there any surprise, as you recall looking back, when you were told by De Silva that the objections still obtained? No. And the objections were what now? That what I was told was that Bohm had relatives in Nazi Germany. Do you recall the circumstances of Bohm's coming to you at your hotel? I did not recall them. Do you know now? No, but you don't know whether he came to you in your room or where? I don't know whether it was in the room or the lobby. Project Y was Los Alamos. That's right. Let me see if I can refresh your recollection about the circumstances of Bohm coming to you. I will read you from a report of a surveillance of J. Robert Oppenheimer, March 16, 1944, in Berkeley, California. Quote, 6:05 p.m. Subject and Frank left hotel. End quote. That would be your brother. Right. Quote, and walked up and down Telegraph Avenue in front of the hotel, both engaged in earnest conversation with each other. 6:15 p.m. David Bohm walked south on Telegraph Avenue and met the Oppenheimers in front of the hotel. J.R. Oppenheimer and Bohm engaged in conversation for 5 minutes, but Frank stood about 10 feet away from them and did not participate in the conversation. End quote. Does that help to refresh your recollection? No, I don't remember the incident. I don't see any reason to doubt it. Were you waiting for Bohm on the sidewalk there? Since I don't remember the thing, I could not remember that. I don't know whether this was an appointment, an accident, or what. I might read you the next item. Quote, 6:20 p.m. Subject and Frank entered car, license 53692, with Oppenheimer's luggage and drove to Fisherman's Wharf, San Francisco. End quote. Would that indicate to you that you had waited for Bohm on the sidewalk? It suggests it, but I don't want to remember more than I do remember. I don't want you to, Doctor. Let me read to you from a memorandum from Captain De Silva at that time. He must have been promoted. Date dated 6 January 1944. Quote, subject DSM conversation with J.R. Oppenheimer, Captain Calvert, U.S. Engineer Office, address. 1. During a recent conversation with Dr. Oppenheimer, he brought up the subject of a situation at Berkeley, California. A general discussion followed, touching on such subjects as of AEC, which Oppenheimer deplored, the Eltenton Incident, which he thought was reprehensible, and the contacts made by the professor, which contacts he believed to be innocent. During the course of the conversation, which took place en route to Santa Fe, Oppenheimer touched on the subject of what persons at Berkeley were, in his opinion, truly danger. He named David Joseph Bohm and Bernard Peters as being so. Oppenheimer stated, however, that somehow he did not believe that Bohm's temperament and personality were those of a dangerous person, and implied that his dangerousness lay in the possibility of his being influenced by others. Peters, on the other hand, he described as a crazy person, and one whose actions would be unpredictable. He described Peters as being quite a red, and stated that his background was filled with incidents which indicated his tendency toward direct action. End quote. Do you recall that conversation? I recall the conversation, though I don't recall these as accurate words. I remember only being asked by De Silva among these people, and I think there were 4, which do you think is the most dangerous, and saying Peters. Did you mention Bohm as truly dangerous? I am quite certain I didn't. I think De Silva mentioned Bohm, Weinberg, and somebody else, and Peters. You say you are quite sure you did not mention Bohm as dangerous. I think so. You think you did? I did not. I certainly never thought of him that way. You did not think of him as dangerous. If you had, you would not have spoken to De Silva in March about bringing him to Y, would you? I should hope not. I think there is a garble in this, and also the whole tone is not, I believe, accurate. The conversation was initiated by De Silva. He presented me with a list of names. I don't believe this is something that I dredged up for him. What did you know of Bohm's background? I don't think I know anything about it. Nothing? I have even forgotten where he comes from. I think I did not that. Was it Pennsylvania? There was nothing in Bohm's background to cause you to say to De Silva that Bohm was a dangerous person? No, my strong recollection is that I couldn't have said that, and didn't think so. You could not be mistaken about that. I could be mistaken about almost anything, but this does not fit. But you had asked General Groves to transfer Bohm to Los Alamos. In March of 1943, yes, before that. How long had you known Bohm? When did you first meet him? I met him when he came as a graduate student to the department. I have forgotten when that was, a couple of years before 1943, probably. Where is he now, do you know? Yes, he is in Sao Paulo, Brazil. He taught for a while at Princeton. At the university, yes. You helped him get his job there, didn't you? I think I did. When? 1946 or 47. What job did he have there? He was assistant professor of physics. Did you see him frequently when he was there? He came to seminars. I saw him infrequently otherwise. Did you see him socially? Infrequently. I went to a farewell party that Professor Wigner gave for him. When was that? Just before he left for Brazil, probably 1949 or 1950. Do you recall in May 1949 when Bohm testified before the House committee here? Yes. Yes. I remember meeting him on the street with Weinberg and Whitman and a couple of other people. What street? Main Street of Princeton, Nassau Street. Weinberg was up there? He was up there. Was that before he testified? Oh no, Weinberg was not there. I'm sorry. Lomanitz and Bohm were there. Was that before they testified? Yes, I think so. Did you discuss with them, or either of them, what their testimony might be? I said they should tell the truth. What did they say? They said we won't lie. Did you discuss with them whether they would claim their constitutional privilege? No. You know now they did claim their constitutional privilege. Yes, but I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know whether they knew it. This was a 2-minute brush on the street. Did they ask you for any advice about testifying? No. Did they ask you to recommend counsel to them? I'm sure not. Did you recommend counsel to them? I would have if they asked me. Who would you have recommended? I'm foggy on this. I might have recommended our, but this is not a recollection. Sorry, I would have recommended der, but this is not a recollection. It is a conjecture. Mr. Der did in fact represent them, didn't he? Right, I don't know that. You first said right. How did you know that? Did you hear he did? It was certainly in the record. Did you read the record? Yes. When? Sometime afterward, I don't know. Why? I was involved in the same investigation. You knew that they refused to answer upon the grounds of possible self-incrimination when asked about their Communist Party membership and activities. I did. That is right. And espionage activities. Did they refuse to answer about espionage too? Doctor, I don't have it before me, so I won't make a categorical answer. You probably know it better than I do. I'm not sure. Did you see Bohm after he testified? I would assume so, since he came back to Princeton. How long after he testified was the farewell party? Quite a long while. How long? I think he spent a whole year at Princeton. Do you recall who else was at the party? No, I remember the host, and I remember that most of the physicists in the physics department were invited. Who was the host? Eugene Wigner. Was Bohm fired at Princeton? No, his contract was lapsed. It was not renewed. Did you assist him in getting his job in Brazil? I don't believe I had anything to do with that. Did you write him a letter of recommendation? I don't remember. Would you think about that a minute? It won't do any good. Would you have written him one if he had asked? I'm quite sure I would have written a letter of recommendation about his physics. Do you know how he did get his job in Brazil? No. Do you know anybody in Brazil who is a physicist? Caesar Lattes. Doctor, let me go back a moment. I'm sorry I overlooked something. Did there finally come a time when you did disclose the identity of Professor X? Yes. When was that? I don't remember when. In late summer or fall of 1943, I should think, at Los Alamos. May I, in the interest of having the record perfectly straight, there is a Professor X who has been in the newspapers, and I think that ultimately turned out to be a name that does appear in this record. Oh wait, sorry, that was Gray. That just said that. I'll say that again. May I, in the interest of having the record perfectly straight, there is a Professor X who has been in the newspapers, and I think that ultimately turned out to be a name that does not appear in this record. Yes, I'm sorry. So let us make it clear, when Dr. Oppenheimer is asked about disclosing the identity of Professor X, actually in this case we are talking about Dr. Chevalier. Yes. We agreed that we would refer to him as X. I'm talking about Chevalier. I'm sorry, I guess it was Scientist X, but in any event, let us make it clear what we are talking about. I think your point is well taken. There came a time, at least, when you did disclose that Hakon-Chevalier was the intermediary. Right. I find in the file, Doctor, a telegram signed Nichols and addressed to the area engineer, University of California, blah, 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 reading as follows. Quote, Lansdale advises that according to Oppenheimer, Professor Contact of Eltenton is Hakon-Chevalier. Classified secret. Oppenheimer states in his opinion Chevalier engaged in no further activity other than 3 original attempts. End quote. That wire is dated 13 December 1943. Would it be about 13 December 1943 that you disclosed the identity of Dr. Chevalier? I thought it was earlier. It could have been that late. I thought it was considerably earlier. To whom did you make that disclosure? To General Groves. Under what circumstances? We talked in his room in Los Alamos. All right. He told me that he simply had to know, and I surely told him that the story I told Pash was a cock and bull story at that time, that there were no three people. In other words, you lied to Groves too. No, I told him that the story I told Pash was a cock and bull story. You told Groves that you had told Pash a cock and bull story? I am quite certain about that. You are sure about that? Yes. You notice in this wire from General Nichols, there are still the three people. You are still talking about three people. I notice in the file of the same day, General Nichols wired the commanding officer, U.S. engineer Captain De Silva, quote, Hakon-Chevalier to be reported by Oppenheimer to be professor at Radlab who made 3 contacts for Eltenton. Classified secret. Oppenheimer believed Chevalier engaged in no further activity other than 3 original attempts. End quote. On 12 December, that last wire was from whom? Nichols. On 12 December 1943, a wire to Captain Calvert in Clinton, Tennessee. That was that. What was that? Oak Ridge? Yes. Quote, according to Oppenheimer, Professor Contact of Eltenton is Hakon-Chevalier. Oppie states in his opinion, beyond original 3 attempts, Chevalier engaged in no further activity from Lansdale, De Silva and Johnson to be notified by you. End quote. Does that indicate to you that you told General Groves that there weren't 3 contacts? Certainly to the contrary. I am fairly clear. You think General Groves did tell Colonel Nichols and Colonel Lansdale your story was cock and bull? I find that hard to believe. So do I. Doctor, may we again refer to your answer? Please, sir. On page 4, quote, in the spring of 1938, I had been introduced by a friend to Jean Tatlock, the daughter of a noted professor of English at the university, and in the autumn I began to court her, and we grew close to each other. We were at least twice close enough to marriage to think of ourselves as engaged. Between 1939 and her death in 1944, I saw her very rarely. She told me about her Communist Party memberships. They were on-again, off-again affairs, and never seemed to provide for her what she was seeking. I do not believe that her interests were really political. She was a person of deep religious feeling. She loved this country, its people, and its life. She was, as it turned out, a friend of many fellow travelers and communists, a number of whom I later was to become acquainted with. End quote. Doctor, between 1939 and 1944, as I understand it, your acquaintance with Miss Tatlock was fairly casual, is that right? Our meetings were rare. I do not think it would be right to say that our acquaintance was casual. We had been very much involved with one another, and there was still very deep feeling when we saw each other. How many times would you say you saw her between 1939 and 44? That is 5 years. Would 10 times be a good guess? What were the occasions for you seeing her? Of course, sometimes we saw each other socially with other people. I remember visiting her around New Year's of 1941. Where? I went to her house, or to the hospital, I don't know which, and we went out for a drink at the top of the Mark. I remember that she came more than once to visit our home in Berkeley. You and Mrs. Oppenheimer. Right. Her father lived around the corner, not far from us in Berkeley. I visited her there once. I visited her, as I think I said earlier, in June or July of 1943. I believe you said in connection with that you had to see her. Yes. Why did you have to see her? She had indicated a great desire to see me before we left. At that time, I couldn't go. For one thing, I wasn't supposed to say where we were going or anything. I felt that she had to see me. She was undergoing psychiatric treatment. She was extremely unhappy. Did you find out why she had to see you? Because she was still in love with me. Where did you see her? At her home. Where was that? On Telegraph Hill. When did you see her after that? She took me to the airport, and I never saw her again. That was 1943? Yes. Was she a communist at that time? We didn't even talk about it. I doubt it. You said in your answer that you knew she had been a communist. Yes, I knew that in the fall of 1937. Was there any reason for you to believe that she wasn't still a communist in 1943? No. Pardon? There wasn't. except that I have stated in general terms what I thought and think of her relations with the Communist Party. I do not know what she was doing in 1943. You have no reason to believe she wasn't a communist, do you? No. You spent the night with her, didn't you? Yes. That is when you were working on a secret war project. Yes. Did you think that consistent with good security? It was a matter of fact, not a word. It was not good practice. Didn't you think that put you in a rather difficult position had she been the kind of communist that you have described her or talk about her this morning? Oh, but she wasn't. How did you know? I knew her. You have told us this morning that you thought that at times social contacts with communists on the part of one working on a secret war project was dangerous. Could conceivably be. You didn't think that spending a night with a dedicated communist. I don't believe she was a dedicated communist. You don't? No. Did she go over to Spain? No. Ever? Not during the time I knew her. What was the occasion of her telling you about her? Of, what was the occasion of her telling you about her Communist Party membership? She would talk about herself rather freely, and this was one aspect of her life. She would tell me that she had been with a medical unit. I am making it up, with some kind of unit, and it had been frustrating. What do you mean you are making it up? I mean, I don't remember what kind of a unit, but she had been with some sort of a communist unit and had left it. It had been a waste of time, and so on. By a medical unit, you mean a medical cell. That is what I would have meant. You say here she was, as it turned out, a friend of many fellow travelers and communists. Who were they? Well, Addis was a friend of hers. Lambert was a friend of hers. Doctor, would you break them down? Would you tell us who the communists were and who the fellow travelers were? Lambert was a communist. Addis is reported to be a communist in the commission's letter. I did not know whether he was a member of the party or not. You knew he was very close, didn't you? Yes, among fellow travelers, Chevalier. Among communists, or probable communists, a man and his wife who wrote for the People's World. Who were they? John Pittman and his wife. A lawyer called Aubrey Grossman. His wife she had known. Was she a communist? I don't know in the sense of party membership, but very close. Close. Is the list long enough? I want you to give the ones you remember, Doctor. I assume when you wrote this sentence that she was, as it turned out, a friend of many fellow travelers and communists, that you had people in mind. I have gone over some of those I had in mind. Have you any more in mind? There was another couple, yes, a girl called Edith Arnstein. Was she a communist? I believe so, yes. Anybody else? I am sure there were more people. When did you first meet this group of communists and fellow travelers who were friends of Miss Tatlock? That came on gradually, during 1937, maybe late 1936, not all at once. But they continued to be your friends. Some of them. Chevalier still is your friend? Chevalier is my friend. Addis was your friend until he died? No, we had essentially, I think, no relations after the war. When did he die? In 1950 or 51? Do you recall when you were interviewed by the FBI in 1950, you were asked about Dr. Addis? Yes. And you declined to discuss Dr. Addis? Yes. You said he was dead and couldn't defend himself. I did say that. What did you think he had to defend himself against? Being close to the Communist Party. Didn't you continue to see Dr. Addis periodically until he died? No. But you say in your answer he did become a very close friend of yours. Oh, sorry. But you say in your answer he did become a very close friend of yours. Close would be wrong, I am sure. He became a good friend, I think I said. A friend. A friend. That is more like it, I imagine. At least he was enough of a friend so you wouldn't discuss him with the FBI, is that correct? Yes. That was in 1950. I asked if it were important, and they thought not. They asked you about him, though, didn't they? They were asking about me. Didn't they also ask about your friends? Not much. You say in your answer at page 5, in describing your friendship with Miss Tatlock and meeting people through her, quote, I liked the new sense of companionship. Who were the people whose companionship you enjoyed that you met through Miss Tatlock, the people that you just mentioned? Oh, no. People who were in the teachers' union, people in Spanish causes, great masses of people, in addition to some of those I just mentioned. Was the teachers' union a communist organization? I think that there were communists in it. I know there were some. Who were they? Kenneth May, and I believe his first wife. Who else? I have no certain knowledge of anyone else. You say in your answer at page 6, quote, I was invited to help establish the teachers' union, which included faculty and teaching assistants in the university and school teachers of the East Bay, end quote. Who invited you? We invited ourselves, I guess. A group of people from the faculty talked about it and met, and we had a lunch at the faculty club or some other such place and decided to do it. I don't know at whose initiative this was caused. About when was that, Doctor? 1937 would be a fair guess. How long did you stay in that union? Until 1941, or I think early 1941. Did you make a formal resignation? No. That chapter of the Union dissolved, and with its dissolution, was Kenneth May an officer in the Union? I don't believe so. Do you recall who the officers were during your tenure as recording secretary? I will remember some of them. Who? Chevalier was president at one time. Margaret Ellis was president at one time. Was she a communist? I don't know. Was she close to it? I think so. The reason I think so is that I had a letter from her about the Rosenberg affair not long ago. You mean asking your support? Something like that. For the Rosenbergs? Yes. That indicates to you that she is a communist sympathizer, at least. That is right. Who else among the officers? A man called Fontenrose. Joe is the first name. Was he a communist sympathizer? I don't think so. Who else? I don't remember. I will interject here. The Rosenbergs are the couple that basically engaged in espionage and gave a bunch of nuclear secrets to the Russians in like the early 50s. So yeah, that's interesting. Anyway, Kenneth May was a Kenneth May was a communist functionary in Alameda County, was he not? That was later. Later. Yes. Are you going to ask anything more about the teachers' organization? I didn't have any questions in mind. I would just ask whether the dissolution related to any international event. The miserable thing fell apart because it grew into a debating society between the anti-interventionists and the interventionists, which had even less to do with teachers' welfare than what we had been doing before. I was strongly in favor of letting it collapse. It is my recollection that was not the pro-communist view at the time that they wanted it to continue. You say in your answer on page 5, quote, I contributed to the strike fund of one of the major strikes of Bridges Union, end quote. Do you recall about when was that, Doctor? Could it have been 1938? I don't know. Well, it couldn't have been before 1936 because I just didn't know or do anything of that kind before late 1936. It was probably 1938, 1937, or 1938. Do you recall about how much you gave? I can guess. How much? About 100? In cash? I think so. Do you recall through whom you made that contribution? I went to the wicket, the Union wicket. Did you understand that Bridges was a communist? No, I understood to the contrary. I may have been fooled. You subscribed to the People's World, you say. When did you do that? I don't recollect. It was for several years. How long did that subscription continue? I would say for several years. Can you tell us about when it expired? I can't of my own knowledge, no. Was it after you joined the project? Since I don't know when it was, I can't answer that question. That was the West Coast Communist newspaper, wasn't it? That's right. Did you have that paper sent to you at your house? Yes. I don't remember whether I had it sent, but anyway, it came. And you paid for it. Again, I don't remember whether I paid for it or whether it was distributed. I think I paid for it. Do you recall whether you canceled your subscription or whether you just let it expire or what? I don't recall. I don't believe I canceled the subscription. Why did you subscribe to the People's World? Well, I guess I took an interest in this formulation of issues. Perhaps somebody asked me to. You read it, I take it? Not fervently. It taught me to read. Well, would you repeat that? It was an interjection that was unnecessary. Excuse me. You say, quote, I contributed to the various committees and organizations which were intended to help the Spanish Loyalist cause, end quote. What were they? Wasn't there a North American committee? I don't know, doctor. I'm asking you. I think there was a North American committee. There was another one. I don't know its name. Were those contributions fairly substantial? I would think they were. What amounts would you say? In the $100 range. In cash? Pardon me? In cash? I would think so. I will come back to that in a minute. You say, quote, I also began to take part in the management of the physics department, the selection of courses, and the awarding of fellowships, end quote. What do you mean by taking part in awarding of fellowships, doctor? I was named to the graduate council of the university. The graduate council had a committee on graduate fellowships, and I served on that. This has nothing to do with communism. Were any fellowships awarded to any of your students? I would hope so. Do you know whether or not Lomanitz or Bohm or Weinberg or Fred Mann had a fellowship? My recollection is that they did not. In all events, if they did, you didn't have anything to do with it. No, I think I was off the graduate council at that later date. You say on page 6, quote, I also became involved in other organizations. For perhaps a year, I was a member of the Western Council of the Consumers Union. Who composed the Western Council of the Consumers Union? Chairman and the man, Chairman and the man I knew best was Robert Bradley, a professor of economics at the university. Was he a communist sympathizer? No, I don't think so. His wife was Mildred Eddy, and the two of them were what made this. They had enthusiasm for this. Did they recruit to it? Yes, they asked to come. It was a very inappropriate thing for me to do. I know nothing about the business. Who else was in the council? I remember only one other man, and that is a man named Folkoff, who was not Isaac Folkoff. That is Richard Folkoff. That could be. Was he a communist? I thought not, but I could be wrong. Anybody else? There were other people, and I have forgotten them. What year was that you were a member of that? It says in my PSQ. I'm afraid I can't improve on that. Could it have been 1937? I think the biography will show, the one we submitted to you. Quote, I joined the American Committee for Democracy and Intellectual Freedom in 1937, end quote. Did you also serve on the National Executive Committee of that organization? The letterhead says so. I didn't meet with them. Do you know how you happened to get on the letterhead? I suppose I accepted membership. I have no records of this except my own record, except what I said about it in the personal security questionnaire. Then Mr. Gray. 1938 is shown here as the date of the Consumers Union, 1938 to 39. Yes. When did you serve on the executive committee of the American Committee for Democracy and Intellectual Freedom? I would assume that my dates 1937 to whatever it was that I gave in the personal security questionnaire refer to that. I have no other record. Again, I think the biography may show that. It shows 1937 in the biography. The copy of the biography does not show a date when you ceased to be a member of that organization. When was it? I have no recollection of ceasing to be. It played no part in my life. You mean you might still be a member of it? I haven't heard from them for an awful long time. Your PSQ lists the American Committee for Democracy and Intellectual Freedom, 1937 until, with an asterisk being at the footnote of the page where you say, it includes all organizations to which I now belong. So you were still a member in 1942, were you not? Right. You have no idea how long after that you continued to be a member. My membership involved no attendance in meetings, no activities that I could recall, and I certainly was not very active at Los Alamos. I see. You say talking about your PSQ on page 6, I say on that questionnaire that did not include sponsorships. What is a sponsorship? I am charged with a sponsor of the of sorry. I am charged with a sponsor of this Friends of the Chinese People. I don't know what it means, but I think it means that you lend your name to something. I'm sure that I lent my name to one or two parties or bazaars for Spanish War or Spanish Relief. I had no record of these and no good memory of them when I filled out my PSQ. A sponsorship was just something you lent your name but did not become a formal member. Yes, maybe it was something you couldn't be a member of. Were there any other things that you think of now that you sponsored as distinguished from joining? No, I can't. Now, coming to your questionnaire again, page 7, quote, the statement is attributed to me that while I was not a communist, I'd probably belonged to every Communist Front organization on the West Coast and had signed many petitions on which communists were interested. I do not recall this statement, nor to whom I might have made it, nor the circumstances. The quotation is not true. It seems clear to me that if I said anything along the lines quoted, it was a half-jocular overstatement. End quote. Assuming that it was a jocular overstatement, Doctor, had you belonged to any Communist Front organizations that you can think of? We have just been over the Committee on Democracy and Intellectual Freedom, which has been so designated, Consumers Union, which has been so designated, the Teachers Union, of which it could be so designated, I think. I think we have been over the list. That that is what you had in mind. Had you signed any petitions? I don't remember signing petitions. I think I may have, or I would have signed petitions in the early days with regard to lifting the embargo on arms to Spain, or such a matter, but this is conjecture and not memory. Mr. Chairman, I have just a couple more questions. Very well. Doctor, I would like to read to you from a memorandum dated 14 September 1943. Memorandum for the file. Quote, subject, discussion by General Groves and Dr. Oppenheimer, signed John Lansdale. Reading as follows. During a recent train ride between Cheyenne and Chicago, General Groves and Dr. Oppenheimer had a long discussion which covered in substance the following matters. F. Oppenheimer categorically stated that he himself was not a communist and never had been, but stated that he had probably belonged to every Communist Front organization on the West Coast and signed many petitions concerning matters in which communists were interested. End quote. Did you make such a statement to General Groves as reflected in this memorandum from Colonel Lansdale? I remember the trip from Cheyenne to Chicago. I do not remember making the statement. I see no reason to deny it. Do you think if you made it, you were just joking with General Groves? I'm pretty sure I was. Do you think General Groves misunderstood you, maybe? Maybe he didn't. Maybe in transmission it got garbled. I have no way of knowing. In that same paragraph, while I am reading, quote, he, meaning you, stated while he did not know, he believed his brother Frank Oppenheimer had at one time been a member of the Communist Party, but that he did not believe that Frank had had any connections with the party for some time. Do you recall that statement? I don't recall it. I did believe at the time that my brother had been out of the party for some time. Did you tell General Groves that while you did not know, you believed that your brother had at one time been a member of the party? I should not have told him that. Did you tell him that? I don't know. But you might have. I should not have. If you did say that to General Groves, it was not strictly true. No, I did. No, I did know. Because you knew he had been a member. I did know it. Yes, sir. Would you now deny that you made that statement to General Groves? Oh, I couldn't. In other words, you might have told General Groves something that was not true. Well, I hope I didn't. You might have, is that correct? I hope I didn't. But you might have, might you not? Obviously, I might have. It is 4:30, Mr. Chairman. All right. I should like to say before we recess that one thing I neglected to say with respect to the transcript which we discussed earlier. In view of the fact, and especially referring now to the transcript of the first day, since there are so many references to other agencies, particularly the Defense Department, I am informed that it has been necessary to check not only with the security officers of the Commission, but with other departments, which in part explains the delay. There is no design, Mr. Garrison. I am sure of that. We will meet again at 9:30. Thereupon, at 4:30 p.m., a recess was taken until Thursday, April 15, 1954, at 9:30 a.m. All right, that was it for this episode. So yeah, again, just Oppenheimer getting grilled and sort of like entrapped a little bit, where uh, I mean, this is ridiculous, basically. Robb will ask him something just to hear his response under oath on record, just so that a few questions later he can introduce that, oh, he had a transcript or a report or a something else, some other record that indicated, that his response wasn't true, uh, and just drops it on the table, basically. Just says, like, which is kind of like a perjury trap tactic that they use today. I don't think Oppenheimer ever got accused of actual perjury, but definitely it's like clear that he was being very unsettling, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, that definitely sucks. That would not want to be a position I would want to be in. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else to say on this afternoon hearing. But I think that's it. I think that was, interesting. Getting into the cross examination and the intensity of that has been really fun so far. So tomorrow, you know, Thursday, April 15th, 1954, will, be volume 4, and I will be going through that next week. And yeah, I am interested to see where this goes. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.